Good morning, everybody. Thank you for logging in. We'll just give it another minute or so. We've got a lot of people on already, which is terrific. We'll just give it another minute and then we'll get going. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for logging in today for today's Malaysia webinar. My name's Shari. I'm the Partnership and Operations Manager here at Australian Organic, so welcome to you all. There's a lot to get through today. So as per the other webinars, we'll start with Catherine from Asialink. We also have a special guest joining us from Malaysia, Sharon Karamsingh, with some great insights. She's an expert in the field there. Then we'll take a short break over to Najib from Export Connect, and then another short break, and then you'll hear from Josephine Pedersen from Australian Organic, our new technical officer. Catherine, welcome, good morning, and I'll hand over to you.
Good morning, Sherry. Thank you for the welcome. And good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see so many of you joining this webinar as we take a deep dive into Malaysia. Lots of some new faces, so looking forward to getting to know you a little bit. Just bear with me and I'm going to share my screen. Certainly, thanks, Sherry, for the introduction. I'm going to be working today with my colleague Sharon Karamsingh, who, as Sherry said, is based in Malaysia, and delighted that as we talk about kind of how do we understand and navigate the cultural context of being in Malaysia and working with Malaysia, that we've got Sharon on the ground to share with you some of the examples and suggestions that she has. She is an expert who works with expatriates who spend time coming into Malaysia and working, and has worked in that space for many years. So really delighted to have her expertise. Before we begin, we'd really like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands of which we are present today and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And we extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending this online session today. For those of you who don't know, it's just a few words about Asialink. So the reason we're so passionate about these workshops, which help you explore different markets across the Asia region, and particularly today to focus on Malaysia, is because our mission really at Asialink is around how do we help build Australia-Asia engagement. And at Asialink Business, we are the National Centre for Asia Capability. So we're all about day in, day out, thinking about what are the things that we can do that will help Australia build a more Asia capable. So as we get into that, and before we begin our session, we'd love just to get a little bit of a sense of who is on the webinar today. And we'd love to begin that with a bit of a poll, which checks in terms of your experience of Malaysia. So I guess some of you will have been already working, perhaps living in Malaysia. Others of you may have travelled, may have studied there. And for others of you, perhaps you haven't had too much experience yet. So thanks, Kat. We've just had that quiz pop up, the poll. Could you just select for us the experience that you have? So select what's most relevant for you. You might have lived and worked in Malaysia, studied, you might be working with Malaysian partners already. You might have travelled to Malaysia or been on holiday, or you may not have had experience. So we'd love to get a few of those responses in from you. Yeah, seeing a few of those come up. That's great. You can just pop in and just tick on one of the bubbles, and that allows us just in the background to get a bit of a sense of the experience and expertise that we have here in the group. All right. So, Kat, what did we find? Right, so about a third of you are working already with Malaysian partners, and that seems to be the most contact and connection you have in the group. Somebody's lived and worked there. A couple of people have had some amazing holidays, and some of you not had any experience at all. Like, it's really helpful to know, and certainly as we work through the webinar this morning, please do feel free, particularly if you've lived and worked, you're working with Malaysian partners, to add some of your observations or your questions into the group. I think that's incredibly helpful. Let's get going. We're going to do three things in the first part of the session before we hand over to Najib to really run into the export lens of the session. But what Sharon and I are looking to do is really give an overview of Malaysia as a country in terms of some of the origins, what that means in terms of what you might expect from a working connection. We'll introduce a framework which helps you navigate working across cultures. And then we really want to drill into some insights around the Malaysian mindset. So given the context, given the culture, what does that mean in terms of what's important, and how does that impact what you might need to think about as you're doing business in the country? So I always smile. Malaysia at a glance is a bit of a busy slide, but I think one of the interesting things that it's also useful for us to know here in Australia is that Australia and Malaysia have a long-standing friendship, and that's built on a shared history. We've had diplomatic presence in Malaysia for 65 years. So 2020 was the 65-year mark of that diplomatic relationship and presence. We've got exceptional people-to-people links between Australia and Malaysia, particularly through our strong educational ties. We sort of estimate there's probably over 300,000 Malaysian alumni of Australian educational institutions in Australia and Malaysia. So a real sort of strong diaspora that's come about through our education systems. And of that 300,000, more than 125,000 Malaysians studied in Australia since 2002. So really quite a recent cohort. And we have had and continue to have strong bilateral cooperation. The Malaysia-Australia Free Trade Agreement was signed in 2013. Malaysia and Australia were among the 15 countries that signed the RCEP in November last year. And in just January this year, our two prime ministers signed and elevated our bilateral relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. So there's a real sense of wanting to continue to invest in trade together to build a strong sort of economic and security relationship between our two countries. It's interesting because, of course, while Malaysia's closest neighbours, Singapore and Indonesia, often get a lot of airtime and dominate a lot of our conversations about opportunities in Southeast Asia. In fact, when you look at some of this data, you can see that Malaysia is one of Asia's fastest growing economies. So GDP at around 4.5. In terms of income level, Malaysia's an advanced middle income nation. And we can see if we look at GNI per capita at a purchasing power parity, we've got sort of a US 28,000 in terms of that middle income bracket. And importantly too, we're seeing this real fast urbanization in Malaysia, which creates significant opportunities. So Australian businesses are present in Malaysia and have built quite a strong reputation there. We've got more than 3,800 Australian businesses with a presence in Malaysia right now, and some of the recognisable brands that you would recognise in organic space include Aesop, Blackmores and Boost Juice, in terms of that sort of broader health and wellness space and some of the presence that those organisations have established. But it's also probably fair to say that Australian business generally has a relatively low awareness of the potential of Malaysia. So today's session, we hope, will give you a bit more insight into what's possible as you think about opportunities for your own business. The other thing that we'll spend some time thinking about and become really clear shortly is just how diverse Malaysia is. Both, it's a multicultural nation. So there's certainly cultural diversity, but there's geographic diversity, and we see diversity in terms of religious influences. And all of those things are quite important to understand as we think about sort of navigating this really quite diverse, hugely full of potential marketplace, but with some complexity too. Just a quick snapshot of, for those of you who haven't travelled to Malaysia yet, where you might find Malaysia in the region. So we see Malaysia sitting there. It's a pretty large country. It occupies more than 329,000 kilometres. And what you can see by that lightly shaded component is that we often talk about Malaysia as having two distinct halves. You've got the peninsular component of Malaysia, which runs sort of south of Thailand, and above, just to the side of Singapore. And then we've got East Malaysia, which you can see sitting down, just kind of backing up into Indonesia. Malaysia itself is quite complex. So it's a federation that comprises 13 states and 3 federal territories. And 11 of those states are in the peninsula, as you can see, with another 2 on Borneo, so in East Malaysia. And Sharon, I might just invite you for a moment. Many people outside of Malaysia might not have appreciated the diversity of the country and the unique context of those different states. Would you be able to just share with us a little bit about some of the differences and what that might mean in terms of folks on the webinar who are thinking about doing business in Malaysia?
Okay. So let me take a look at the states. Okay. So in Malaysia, we have 13 states. And in Peninsular Malaysia, we have what we would say the East Coast and the West Coast. So West Coast, you will find generally the cities are far more liberal compared to the East Coast. So places like Penang, Kuala Lumpur, Malacca, Johor Bahru, people there in the states are very much more liberal. And what I mean by this is, in contrast to Kelantan and Terengganu on the East Coast, which is governed by the Islamic party called PAS, P-A-S, they are very conservative. So they govern with the Sharia law there. And you will even find that they do not have any cinemas. The shopping, when they go for groceries, there's separate lines. And they have a greater emphasis on halal. Their supermarkets are not allowed to carry alcohol or pork, and even if it is, it's outside somewhere else. So they're far more conservative by comparison to Peninsular Malaysia. And then Sabah and Sarawak, they are very unique in the sense that there is great diversity. We still have diversity in Peninsular Malaysia, but you have more of the indigenous people in Sabah and Sarawak. And they are very much protected in terms of jobs. Malaysians from Peninsula cannot go over to work in East Malaysia. And interestingly enough, at one point, if we were to enter Sabah and Sarawak, we had to take a passport with us. Now we just use our ID, the Malaysian card.
It's incredibly helpful, Sharon. Thanks for sharing that. So the sense of really quite a diverse country, If we look at the peninsula itself, differences from east to west, and if we move across to eastern Malaysia, quite distinct in terms of what we might see. Thank you. I thought it might be useful for us just to share a little bit on what we might call those economic development regions that we also see popping up across Malaysia. So really, since the late 2000s, we've seen development regions and special economic zones being set up to really provide a more business-friendly environment, both for local organisations, but also for foreign businesses looking to invest in Malaysia. And again, we can see by geography a slightly different focus from geography to geography. So in the East Coast Economic Zone, we've got a sort of a really large development region with an industrial focus. We see agribusiness, we see human capital development, we see focus on manufacturing, oil, gas, and petrochemicals. If we look at that Sabah development corridor, then we see more sort of food production and a focus on halal food production. And if we look at that northern corridor, we're seeing again more agricultural, manufacturing, logistics, and supply chain. And just popping, for those of you who spent time in Singapore, but perhaps not in Malaysia, you'll probably know Johor Bahru quite well, or JB, because that's connected by a bridge, by a causeway to Singapore. So we've got that special economic zone, that corridor there, Iskandar, which was set up way back in 2006, and really gives, uses the beauty of its location right there at the tip of the peninsula as a gateway into Singapore, which is also a very useful part of the strategy that's been built there. Just a few thoughts on how Malaysia's seen in terms of competitiveness globally. Malaysia's actually, as we mentioned earlier, one of Asia's fastest growing economies. And according to the World Bank, it's among the best 20 countries in the world in which to do business. In terms of overall competitiveness of APAC economies, we see that Malaysia's ranked 10 out of those 20 economies. And in ASEAN, Malaysia ranks it as the second most competitive economy after Singapore. So although we hear a lot about our other fast-growing Southeast Asian nations, it's really Malaysia that sits there at number 2 in terms of the rankings around being competitive and being really well positioned for future growth for Australian organisations. Possibly one of the most useful things to think about is the infrastructure rating. So the development of infrastructure in Malaysia is pretty well advanced. So there's been a lot of government funding over the last 55 years focused on building roads, building ports, building rail, and air transportation is also very smooth and operates really well, with some sort of 8 international airports in Malaysia. Forgive me while I just move on. I presume. Sorry. Kat, I might just ask you for a minute, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to stop sharing. If you wouldn't mind sharing your screen for a minute. And Sharon, I was going to hand over to you because we talk about this, very competitive globally competitive economic situation in Malaysia. But we also know that there are some challenges politically. And I wonder if Kat might just share the screen for us. And you might talk to that.
Yeah. So historically, economic progress has prevailed over any government instability that we might have faced. But over the last 5 years, we have faced a political crisis. But it's not like in Thailand where people take to the streets, or you don't have that kind of violent demonstrations. But the situation currently, since COVID last year, is that we have had a change in government. We voted in a new government in 2018, where they threw out the oldest government, which was 60 years in the making. And last year, a majority of the government that we voted in crossed over. And so we had a change in a government again. So this current government now is going through a lot of uncertainty. The Prime Minister is Tan Sri Muhyiddin, and the latest is that he has declared a state of emergency. That basically means that they've suspended Parliament until August, and they're trying to put off elections because there's a big chance that there may be a vote of no confidence in him. So that's left to be seen. But nonetheless, like I said, economic progress generally has prevailed over political instability. Now, this third lockdown that we're going through has thrown a lot of challenges to Malaysians. It is threatening to stall Malaysia's economic progress. Now, household expenditure has gone down, as has consumption. There's been a decrease but there has been a slight decrease in unemployment rates. We've had unemployment since last year and this year, with many companies, local companies folding. But despite that, the fiscal response in comparison to other emerging economies, the GDP is at 8%. Okay. So, Catherine, over to you. Sorry, Catherine?
Hi, Sharon.
Yeah. So that's really a little bit on the political controversy and the impact on the business environment as it stands right now. Okay.
Thanks so much for that, Sharon. And I guess maybe the additional thing that moves us into conversation there is really to start to talk about too how COVID has been impacting Malaysia over the recent weeks and months. So if we rewind a year ago, Malaysia got some really good press around the way Malaysia had handled COVID. So there was a lot of good press, and our own Lowy Institute here in Australia had ranked Malaysia 17th in terms of job well done. Of course, over the recent months, it's become a lot less positive, hasn't it? And we know that there's been a lockdown that's really lasted for many months now. Can you share a little bit about what's happening now and how that lockdown is impacting businesses and the ability to get things done?
Yeah. So the current situation, we are actually in our third lockdown, by the way. Last year, the lockdown was done very well. In fact, we didn't even go beyond 500 cases, But this year, starting from January, the current situation right now is we are between 8 to 9K per day on average. And on average, since the last month, unfortunately, we've had like 500 deaths per week. Okay, but there has been an increase in vaccinations. 3 days ago, they did 300,000 vaccinations in one day. Okay, so far, 10.7 million people have been vaccinated, of which 7.4 have had their first dose and 3.3% their second dose. There's been increase in aid from other countries. Pfizer recently sent over 1 million vaccines. And companies also are stepping in to support this by getting their own employees vaccinated. Okay. This has impacted local businesses because currently malls, non-essential services are all locked down, only the essential services, but it's slowly opening up. Penang has started to open up. But what we find is that retail sales has really taken a dive, and e-commerce has gone on the rise now, okay, and it's becoming very popular. but I think you're going to be explaining that now also.
Yeah, actually, so thanks for that, Sharon. And you know, certainly as you see, there's that dive in retail sales, and we can see that it mirrors in some ways some of those lockdown periods of time too. What we're also seeing though is that big shift to e-commerce, and so when we look at kind of broader retail sales and figures, there's the expectation that despite the challenges of COVID-19, the Malaysian economy will recover, but that e-commerce will be a big part of that recovery. So I thought it might be worth sharing with our group this morning some fast facts around the e-commerce ecosystem in Malaysia. So Malaysia has the highest rate of smartphone possession in ASEAN. And smartphones are the medium that are increasingly used as part of online purchasing. There's a propensity for Malaysians to shop online for foreign brands, but we've also seen, exactly as you say, Sharon, with the lockdown and the move to e-commerce, that more Malaysian brands are coming online too. There's a real receptiveness for Malaysians to shop online, and that does hold potential for Australian brands to tap into. So if we look at some of what that looks like, let's move to a couple of examples of what that e-commerce system looks like. So Malaysia is also competing fiercely with other countries in the region to provide this pro-business environment, as we talked about. You know, a significant number of Malaysians are active internet users. So 81% of the population, and when you've got a population of 35 million, that means you've got sort of 20 million online consumers. So really substantial and growing consumer market. And linking back to some of that data that we looked at in terms of you know, G&I and this emerging middle class, we can see that those things like the emerging middle class, this increase in foreign direct investment, the evolving payment infrastructure, these things all support this kind of burgeoning e-commerce growth. You can see a couple of mainstream sites that you see, Shopee and Lazada, and more and more propensity for, you know, groceries, medicine, online food ordering, becoming quite mainstream in terms of what we're seeing. Look, I've just noticed here, and we'll come to it shortly, Sharon, but I'm just highlighting that for all of these things, the importance of food labelling and halal certifications in terms of just being really cognizant of that from an export point of view. And we'll have a minute to talk about that shortly. Next slide, please. So, Sharon, not everybody will be familiar with what halal is and what halal requirements are. So I wonder if you would take a minute to step us through what that means.
Yeah. So halal requirements in Malaysia is very key to foreign imports. What is halal? So halal really means what is lawful or what is permitted by Islamic law. And in general, when you talk about non-halal, these are, you know, when they're slaughtering animals that are already dead, okay? Now, the slaughter of animals has to be done by a Muslim butcher. They have a special way of doing it, and they say prayers as they're doing it. Things like blood, alcohol is forbidden in Islam, as is pigs or swine. And the meat was meat that was dedicated to a god other than Allah. Okay, other things that are unlawful also are things like gelatin, but it can be from fish, for example, like L-cysteine, I'm trying to pronounce that. It can be permitted if it is produced by synthetic materials. Okay. Now, lard, for example, is haram. When you talk about food, drinks, products with alcohol in it, that's not permissible. Even a food like broth stock, for example, has to be from animals that are slaughtered in a halal way, okay? So the Department of Islamic Development Malaysia, JAKIM, they're the ones that are responsible for issuing the halal certificate in Malaysia. And they issue health certificates that are mandatory for all halal meat-based products and should be obtained upon entering Malaysia. Okay. Now, halal, non-halal and halal certification, I beg your pardon, can be applied to non-meat products such as processed food, beverages, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and personal care products. We also need to be aware that things like the utensils, the machinery, the equipment, they have to be free from what is deemed non-halal substances. They also can't be too close in proximity when it's being manufactured, for example. And even in storage, it has to be done separately. And the displays also you will find in cosmetic stores here in Malaysia, supermarkets, etc., are done separate from the non-halal food items. Okay.
Thanks very much for that, Sharon. And for some folks who've been, working in Malaysia already or traveling or working with Malaysian partners, that'll be something they're very familiar with. But for others, just being cognizant of the fact that, we've talked about Malaysia being incredibly diverse, and from a religious perspective, 60% of the population are Muslim, and being conscious of that and the halal requirements is something to factor in. So let's take a look at what you're all passionate about, which is organic products and the interest in organic products in Malaysia. So if we look at the chart on the left-hand side, the organic market in Malaysia has remained relatively stable since 2018. But there's a real willingness to spend on organic products, particularly organic foods in Malaysia, with approximately 45% of respondents saying that they would be prepared to pay, a significant price markup for products that are organic. And what we're seeing is also, as we said earlier, that there's a move to buying more of those food products, particularly online. So a focus on organic generally, a focus specifically on food products, and a willingness to buy those things online. The other thing we would say, although there's that willingness to pay more, we do know that there's a price sensitivity, and certainly bearing in mind what you've heard around the current COVID context, that's also something that's important to think about and to be cognizant of. We thought it might be interesting to share a couple of the channels that you might see in terms of how, we just might pop back one slide if I may catch. Yeah. So there is this real focus, particularly on with sort of middle income consumers in, a desire for organic products and services. So organic products are quite well positioned and recognized by consumers. You can see that particularly over the pandemic and during lockdown, there's been more of a focus on websites that you can get to buy your organic products, offering delivery. And we've just got a few examples of what some of those look like. So Everleaf, some of you might have heard of. It's really about aiming to convert local chemical farmers to embrace organic farming. So they support farmers across Malaysia, and then they do food delivery, packages and boxes. TM Organic Farms, that's sort of the middle section in the slide there. Again, they focus on fresh and seasonal produce. Their organic boxes have a spin which says we can have a Western box, we can have an Asian box in terms of the kind of delivery that we might give you. The yellow boxes on the far right. Why not organic? And this distributes sort of dietary supplements and eco-friendly products. And it's got 28 premium global brands, including Australia, as part of sort of the brands that offer through that site. So a lot of growth, a lot of visibility of this space, particularly over the last sort of 18 to sort of 24 months, and the online piece for sure has ramped up over the last 12 months. If we look at the next slide, I just wanted to share a couple of additional sites. So probably two things worth noting. First is that there's growth overall in terms of the offering of organic products and services. Second is that in Malaysia, consumers are accessing both international sites. So iHerb, for example, is a US company which serves local Malaysian consumers. And then we have this growth of Malaysian sites too. So the Hive, which is a social enterprise, really focused on zero waste sustainability, but obviously has some knock on in terms of organic opportunities. And Amazing Rays, which is focused on nutritious and healthy snacks and supplements. So just to highlight those things, that there's this incredible growth. We're seeing international providers come into Malaysia, and we're seeing really this sort of growth of local sites and channels too. And finally, just a few thoughts in terms of the way Australian products and produce is perceived in Malaysia. So there's certainly an agreement that Australian food products particularly are seen as high quality and premium. They're seen to be nutritious, safe. They're certainly seen to be fresh. So there's a demand for these sort of high quality Australian products from Malaysian consumers. And there's a sense of consumers really looking out for products which are particularly nutritious, that are particularly focused on kind of, a healthy lifestyle and linked to wellness. But just to add that final point too, this price sensitivity that we do need to be conscious of. We really just wanted to give you that as sort of a bit of a context in terms of, how do we understand the sort of the Malaysia context, and what that might mean then in terms of, as you get ready to work and think about partnering in Malaysia, some of the cultural elements that you want to be able to navigate. Just wanted to briefly introduce the framework that some of you will be familiar with. But what we want to think about is, how do we build that muscle, that cultural intelligence muscle, which helps us to be more effective when we're working in situations which are different to the ones that we usually work in. So during the session this morning, we're really focusing on three things that might help you just build that cultural intelligence muscle. And the first one is just the knowledge of the culture, so understanding what you might see. The second is kind of the mindfulness of that. So based on what we see, what does that mean? What do I need to watch for? How might I interpret that situation? And then finally, it's kind of the skills. So given what I see, what I notice then about what that might mean, what do I do? What are some of the cross-cultural skills that I could be building and the ways that I might need to adapt to be more successful as I think about working in Malaysia? We have a short video, which we'd love you to watch. And as you watch that video, just think about what comes to mind.
It's one of the most multicultural, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious countries in the world, and I'm thrilled to be back for a third visit.
I'm a Nonya Chinese Siamese and adopted Kalabit.
I'm Chindian and I'm Malaysian.
I'm a Thai Malay Malaysian.
I'm a Malay, Mama, Chinese and a Malaysian.
We are Kadazan.
We are Eurasians.
My dad is Malay and my mom is Chinese.
I'm Malay and Indian.
I'm a Chinese but culturally Filipino.
Out of the 32 million people living in this nation, only about half of them can call themselves
Ethnic Malays!
23%, or 8 million people, are
Ethnic Chinese!
7% are
Ethnic Indians!
and the rest of them are just
confused!
Malaysia's official religion is Islam, attracting 61% of the population. In fact, ethnic Malays are required to be Muslim by law. The next biggest religion is Buddhism at 20%, then Christianity at 10%, and Hinduism at 6%. This incredible diversity of Malaysia's people is reflected in its cuisine, language, and economy. When looking at its food, Malaysia truly has one of the world's best.
My name is Ahmad, and my favorite thing about KL is the food.
A fusion of indigenous Malay, Chinese, Indonesian, and Indian with lighter touches of Dutch and British, its former rulers for 200 plus years. My favorite 3 dishes in Malaysia are nasi lemak, laksa, and banana leaf. Let's talk about language. Most people here know at least 3 languages fluently.
We like to pick and choose certain words. Hey, Macha, you want makan here or tapau?
That sentence means do you want to eat here or take out, but it has words from 4 languages: Tamil, English, Malay, and Chinese. But if you're traveling to Malaysia, you won't have to worry about learning any new languages because almost everyone here speaks fluent English. Almost as good as the Philippines. I am always very, very impressed. From an economic standpoint, the bustling capital of Kuala Lumpur is one of Asia's fastest growing business hubs, and its skyline is dominated by the tallest twin buildings in the world.
The Petronas Tower.
Do you know how tall they are?
I'm not sure.
But once you escape the city life, you'll quickly enter a humble, relaxing, and contrasting lifestyle.
That is why we call diversity! This is why we call Malaysia!
And I am truly in love with this place. I'm Drubinski, and if you like my travel videos, please click subscribe and join me as I plan to visit every...
Okay, so that was a very interesting video that shows you the depth and width, if you were, of diversity in Malaysia. And there are so many mix and intermarriages too, where the people say we're confused, okay? I'd like to throw it open to the group here. If you could answer in the chat. What are some things that, or you can even unfreeze your video and shout out your answers. So what did you notice from that video? Diversity and yummy food, yeah. I'm biased. Malaysia has got the best food. What else have you noticed? Okay, headdress. Someone says headdress. Lots of young people. People are humble. Anything else that you noticed or got out of this video? Yeah, religion plays a big role in their lives. Anything else? Multiculturalism. Yeah. So those are great shout outs from people in terms of the key things that you got out of the video. Malaysia, if we were to look at it in terms of, if you could switch on the slide and just show the iceberg, yeah. Okay. So what you noticed was very much things that you can see on the surface. Okay, that's 10%, accounts for 10%, you know, what we call the visible part. And that's typically like if you visit a country or you're tourist, things, the sights, the food, the people that you see. So someone said headscarf. So in Malaysia, although we're a Muslim country, you will notice that we don't wear the burqa. You don't see people wearing the burqas, okay? They are very colorful, fashionable headscarves. Now, the thing about what is visible on the above the surface is that if we just interpret culture at that level, we're really missing out on what's beneath. Just like an iceberg, it's very deep. Okay, so 90% of culture is in the invisible aspect of the iceberg. Okay, so some of the core values in Malaysia are things like there is this fear of God, there's faith in God across Malay, Chinese, Indians, and others. Okay, of course, there are also people who don't believe in God, but generally you will find a Malaysian population, there's strong religious beliefs, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism, Christianity or Islam. Okay, and you'll find that someone shouted up humility. So across the board, Malaysians do come across as being humble. It's part of their value system. Okay, you'll also find that they are very loyal to the king and country. And this is very interesting because when Malaysians migrate to other countries, they're seen as disloyal, you know. And once you lose your Malaysian citizenship, it's very difficult to get it back. It's one of the few countries also, just an aside, when Malaysians marry foreigners, it's very difficult to get a work permit or even citizenship, unlike Singapore. But coming back again to this cultural iceberg, it's a very hierarchical society, you know. There is, and it's very paternalistic in that sense. And it goes back, way back to even the education system where kids generally do not challenge or speak out to their teachers. And likewise at home in terms of rebelling against the elders, okay? There are downsides to that also, which I'll come to. But one of the things that would also impact from a business context is when you are working with people in business in Malaysia, hierarchy is everything. And the Malays especially are very comfortable with bureaucracy and red tape. And we'll be covering this shortly as well in terms of how titles matter. Now, another thing about the key values for across the board for Malays, Chinese, Indians is this concept of malu or shame or loss of face. Loss of face, meaning that they do not like to be shamed or humiliated or called out in front of other people. They do not like confrontation in front of other people. And that also lies a lot of conflict when it comes to communication styles, because as we will see, Malaysians have a lot of non-verbal communication going on as well, just like the rest of Southeast Asia. And also with the Chinese in particular, their value system, there's a lot of value placed in wealth, also in family. Family is very important for the Chinese and the Indians. And interestingly enough, for the Malays, upon marriage, they typically will go to the wife's side of the family, okay? So for the Chinese and the Indians, education also plays a great part. And one of the things to do with that also is because Malays, which form about 62% of the population, they are given special privileges. They are known as sons of the soil, Bumi Putra. And therefore, because certain things like education is so accessible to them as in scholarship. So for those of us who are in the minority, some of the values that we place is also in education, because for the Indians and the Chinese in particular, education opens up doors and parents see it as something where the kids can go on and better their life, okay? For the Indians also, the other thing that is very important also is family and kinship. And across the board also, I would say that Malays and Indians, there is a strong value of modesty. You know, it can be very conservative, unlike the Chinese, who are much more modern than the other two. If we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so with a multicultural country comes a multitude of cultural values as well, okay? And like I've just explained, Some are very, they are very pertinent to the Malays or the Chinese or the Indians, and some are very common across the board. Okay? Islam is the main religion of this country, and as you've seen in the video, the Malays, it's not an ethnic group. The definition of Malay is they have to be Muslims according to the constitution. And also you do have the indigenous people who are also considered Bumiputra. And they don't necessarily are Muslims, although there have been a lot of conversions, and that's between these four walls, that's been a bit of a controversy as well. So because it's a Muslim country, you will find that, like I said, in the East Coast, it's very, very conservative. And now you will find that in government offices, a lot of government offices, the women wear headscarves. They're required to wear headscarves. But a lot of them also, when they leave work, they do take it off. But it's something that we're seeing more and more. And, you know, the link there also, when you talk about fashion and retail and fashion in this country, there is a huge market also for what they call Muslimah fashion. I think Zara brought out one of the first Muslim models in the advertisement, and you can see that fashion also, you know. Now, the other thing also is this sense of loss of face, or the Malay word is malu, shame. Okay? For Malaysians generally, reputation is everything. They're very concerned about what others will think, you know. Even things like humor, for example, you will never find a Malaysian making fun of themselves, okay? Because that's seen as making yourself look stupid in front of other people. Loss of face also from a business context, like when I teach cultural integration for expats moving to Malaysia, it also has a lot of implications with communication styles, for example. So when communicating with Malaysians, for example, by and large, they do not like confrontations. And one has to be very careful in terms of making sure that the conversation is very diplomatic, which makes it a bit of a challenge also in the workplace context. Okay? I guess in the retail sector, etc., that's quite key. For example, when you talk about customer service, then Malaysians would be expecting exemplary, polite customer service. Entering into a business relationship with an individual, here, when you talk about business in Malaysia, they are very much a country which places a lot of emphasis on building trust and relation first before getting into the business side of things. And that basically means that if MCO was lifted, countries were allowed to visit, that kind of scenario, typically you would see foreign businessmen, it is a practice where the locals might take them out for meals first, because really, to use an Australian word, they're sussing them out, okay, to see whether they can trust them and do business with them. Unlike other countries like Australia, US, etc., where you just go straight into a meeting and you start talking business. So, you know, the thing to bear in mind is when you're talking to your Malaysian colleagues here or people that you partner with in Malaysia, when you're having the conversations, and now we're all in a Zoom virtual world, this is still applicable. Make small talk before you get down to business, you know. And you will find that Malaysians also are very curious. They might ask you things like that you might find offensive in your society, like, oh, are you married? How many children do you have? How old are they? How long have you been married for? Now, don't take offense with those questions. They also expect you to ask them the same questions, and that's their way of building trust with you, okay? And typically, if you're going to do business in Malaysia also, it's very important to get a local person to introduce you to your key clients that you are targeting, okay? The other thing is the term rukun. Now, rukun basically means striving for harmony. You know, we are a society that does not like what I would call lack of harmony. Okay? They like peaceful negotiations, polite conversations, diplomatic ties. Okay, so rukun is driving more towards harmony in society and family. Okay, can we have the next slide? So we come to the Malaysian mindset. So Catherine, over to you.
Thanks, Sharon. And I guess this framework is just a really simple way of putting a little bit of laddering around the things that you've just talked about, the importance of relationships, the importance of formality in the hierarchy. So I thought we'd just share with you all these 5 dimensions that are commonly used to help us understand culture. So we'll run through them, and then we'll just have a little look at how Malaysia and Australia compare along these dimensions and what that might mean then in terms of a few things that you might want to focus on as you get ready to think about doing business in Malaysia and working with Malaysian counterparts. So the first dimension that we think about is, you know, how big or important is the group in terms of how much obligation do we have? So on the right-hand side, we see that some cultures are really what we would call quite interdependent. And so they focus on group harmony and cooperation, some of the things that we've just heard about. Whilst other cultures are more on the left, more independent, much more focused on the individual, what the individual does, what the individual is responsible for. If we look at that second dimension, which is really around relation to hierarchy, if I start on the left-hand side this time, we've got some cultures that are much more egalitarian. So, you know, pretty comfortable with everybody being quite equal, happy to challenge superiors, you know, a sense of everybody being able to contribute and speak up. And then you've got other cultures which are more to the right, where we see that status. So there's an expectation that folks who are more senior should be deferred to, that folks who are more senior or have more status will have more responsibility for decision making. Third dimension is really the sense around comfort with uncertainty. So we've got cultures on the left-hand side that are more willing to take decisions even though not all the facts are known. And then you've got you know, cultures on the right-hand side which are looking for more certainty, more data, more facts, more information in order to make a decision. That fourth dimension is, you know, how direct do we want to be? So we've got cultures on the left-hand side that are pretty direct, comfortable with calling a spade. And then we've got cultures on the right-hand side which are much more indirect. And if we think about what Sharon said in terms of some of the, you know, saving face, being respectful, not pointing out necessarily in an indirect culture, things which are negative in a direct way. And then the final piece, which we've heard a lot about already, actually, is this: how do we form trust? Do we want to get to know people, build relationships, and then get to work? Or do we start working and by doing the work well, build trust that way? So let's take a look. I'm sure as I'm chatting, you're thinking, gosh, I think here in Australia, we might be more this way and Malaysia might be more the next. And the profile on the next slide maps that out. So not surprisingly, some of you will have seen our Australia profile before. So there we are, pretty independent. We like to do things as individuals. We feel that we should be responsible. Lots of focus on being equal and being able to speak up and everybody having the chance to have a point of view. Pretty comfortable with things that aren't known. Just getting started. Very direct communication. You know, so what you see there in Australia is this sort of, you know, Australians sort of being pretty egalitarian, time conscious and direct. We value forthrightness. We value practical informality. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a Malaysian culture, which is much more hierarchical, much more indirect, lots of importance focused on consensus seeking, being part of the group, saving face. And when those differences aren't well understood, that can be quite a cause of friction. And so I guess we wanted to just move into a couple of suggestions that might help you navigate that a little more. And Sharon, you were just going to highlight, if I could invite you to highlight some of those key differences, and perhaps then move us into some tips and techniques that we could use.
Okay, so thank you, Catherine. You've also highlighted a lot of the key differences. So if we take a look at a lot of people also say, you know, when, like, I have a lot of expats, they come to me and they say, Sharon, when we ask our employees if they agree, they might say yes, and sometimes yes can actually mean no. Whereas, you know, in Western society, what you say is what you mean. I.e., you know, if you say yes, it's yes. If you say no, it's no. So Malaysians, if they say maybe for sure, that means no. Okay. And the other thing about Malaysians also is that you have to really be able to read their body language. Now, the challenge now being that with Zoom makes it even more difficult. But you still can by looking at their facial expressions, and that becomes an art in itself. Okay. The other thing is that we've spoken about, they don't like head-on conflict. It's more, they look at collaboration and cooperation. Okay. The other thing also that I want to point out, like in Australia, for example, things are very informal. And in Malaysia, it can be very formal in the business sector and, you know, very hierarchical in the sense that if you go for meetings or you are in a Zoom meeting, usually you will find that the person who is the most senior person in the organization will be the first person to be introduced to you or to give even to give that presentation, you know. And likewise, like if you are making deals with Malaysian counterparts here, you will find that they won't say yes immediately. They will seek the view, you know, of their managers and senior managers. Whereas in the Western context, a lot of the decision making can also be given to junior staff. Okay. And so this face saving is very important. The way you also write your emails, don't write in bold capital letters, etc. And on the other hand thing also, a little something I want to point out about differences, be aware also of your slang. Australia has got a lot of slang words. Okay. Even the accent, and I was telling Catherine, I studied at University of Adelaide. I consider myself fairly fluent in English, but it took me 1 month to really understand Australian accents, you know. So be aware that when you're on a con call or a Zoom meeting, they may not actually be able to grasp what you're saying. So speak slowly, but not slowly to the point of, do you understand? You know, that can be a bit offensive as well. Just slow down the pace. Okay. So over to you, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Sharon. And one of the things we thought we might do is, you know, hierarchy and kind of the names that we come across when we first start working in Malaysia can be complex. And so I wonder if you might do a little mini masterclass for Sharon in terms of thinking about those 3 ethnic groups, you know, what the names look like and how we might navigate them and how we might use titles in order to show respect for folks that we're meeting.
So the Malays, the Chinese, and the Indians, many visitors or people doing business in Malaysia struggle with, you know, how do I understand the names, you know, or the pronunciations, or, you know, which one is the surname? So for the Malays and the Indians, they generally do not have surnames, okay? And they will keep adding the father's name, and we'll show you, we will give you examples in a minute. And for the Chinese, they traditionally have 3 names, with the first name being the surname, okay? And Indians do not have surnames. Okay, so I'll explain a bit more. So if we go on to the next slide. Okay, so for the Malays, when you look at the titles, we put it as titles, names, gender. So Malaysia, another thing with the Malays is they're very status conscious. And in Malaysia, we have titles similar to like in UK where they knight people like Sir, but there are various levelations. So a Datuk Sri is a title. So let's say the Malay person's name is Muhammad Najib. Okay? And this is the Prime Minister that we had formerly, okay? So Najib, then Bin, B-I-N, that defines the gender. That would be son of, okay? And the title of his father was Tun, which is a very high, that would be the highest title given to anyone because there are different levels. And if it's Haji, that means that they have made a pilgrimage to Mecca. So his name would be Dato Sri Muhammad Najib bin Tun Haji. His father's name was Abdul Razak. But he would probably, he went by the name of Najib Razak. Okay, so he abbreviated it. Now, if somebody doesn't have a title and it's a male, you would say Encik. Now, this is very important if you're dealing with the government agencies. The formality is very important. So you would say Encik, and let's say his name is Ismail Yaakob bin, and there's no title, and Zainuddin Mustafa, that's his dad's name. Okay. He might abbreviate it to Ismail Yaakob, right? Let's say it's Najib's wife. Well, this is a different example. So let's say a lady, her husband is a Datuk Sri, she becomes a Datin Sri, okay? In this example, her name is Siti. Binti means daughter of. Okay, and she does, let's say there's no title to her father, and his name is Muhammad Ali. So she might call herself Siti Muhammad Ali. Okay? Puan is an older woman, Cik is a younger woman, Rohani, Binti, which is daughter of, if there's no title, but let's say her father is Haji, so Haji Siddiq. So she might put her name as Rohani Siddiq, okay? Now, let's say somebody's title is Dato and Syed Siddiq. Now, the word Syed, typically, or Sharifah, they claim to be direct descendants of Prophet Muhammad, okay? But generally speaking, we know that those with names like Syed and Sharifah, they have Middle Eastern ancestors, okay? So let's say Syed Siddiq bin, which is son of, and Syed Ahmad Zainal. He will still keep his name as Syed Siddiq. Okay, so you can see there's no surname. So next time, let's say Syed Siddiq has a son called Daniel. Daniel will be Daniel bin Syed Siddiq. So it keeps going according to the father's name. Datin, so his wife, let's say a Dato's wife would be Datin. If her name is Sharifa Aini Binti, and let's say her father was a Tan Sri, then it would be Tan Sri Syed Zahid Othman. But she might call herself Sharifa Aini. Okay. Are there any questions to this so far before we move on to the next slide? It's okay, we'll give you a pop quiz after this. So the next one, which is Chinese names. Okay, Chinese traditionally have 3 names. So when you hear a name like Li Chongwei, Li is the surname, and that surname will carry through the generations. Okay, Chong, each generation, they will be given a certain second middle name. So let's say Li Chongwei, his cousins may be called Li Chongming. But in a lot of companies, especially multinationals, because the surname has to be at the back, you will get abbreviated names like C.W. Lee, okay? So Lee might be at the back. You also find that a lot of the Chinese will give themselves very interesting names like Sky, Rain, Venus. In fact, I had a colleague when I was working in Intel. Every time he dialed in, I felt very bad. I would have to mute the phone because he would say, "Good morning, this is this is Pinocchio from China, and I used to think, oh my goodness, does he even know what the meaning is? So the challenge with that also is that if you look for the emails, you might not be able to find it, because they will have the Chinese emails. Now, if they want to move towards a more personal level, when they introduce you, someone says, look, meet Mr. Lee. He might turn around and say, no, just call me Chong Wei. But I know that they realize that foreigners have difficulty. So you'll find that a lot of them adapt and use more Western names in business. Okay. All right. So now we move on to Indian names. Now for Indian names, again, let's say there's someone is given the title of Dato Seri, okay? And his name is Sivalingam. A.L. anak lelaki translated means son of, and let's say his father's name is Muthusamy. Now, some people on their business card, they might put it as Sivalingam Muthusamy. His wife, let's say her name is Magana, her AP means daughter of. Okay? And then Krishnasamy, she will not take her husband's name, so she might on the business card be known as Morgana Krishnasamy. Okay? Now I've got a question. Anybody want to switch on their videos and unmute themselves? How would you pronounce this name? Anyone? Anybody who would like to shout out, how would you pronounce this name? If you're struggling, I don't blame you, okay? So the pronunciation of this is Gnada Sambadan. Now that's really difficult, right? So you'll find that a lot of Indians, they will just give you a shorter name. So he might shorten it to, hey, you know what, Catherine, just call me Sam. He'll take the word Sam out of there. Likewise with like Sivalingam, he might just say, hey, call me Siva. Or Muthusamy might just say, call me Muthu. So they realize that, it's very difficult for other races to pronounce their names, and they generally abbreviate their names. But Indians who are Christians will generally have Western names, and they will keep the surnames, okay? So over to the next slide. Okay, so now we have a quiz, and you can answer on the chat box. So, does a Malay man have a family surname? Yes or no? Great, yeah, generally everybody's got it right, okay? So no, Malays do not have family surnames, okay? Now let's look at the next quiz question. So what does Syed indicate? When someone has the name Syed Siddiq or Sharifah Aini, what does that indicate to you? Can you remember? Okay, so basically it indicates they are, yes, Middle Eastern descendant. What else? So they also claim to be descendants of Prophet Muhammad. Okay. Yes, exactly. Lineage from Muhammad. Okay. So if we can have the next slide. What is the family name for Kwan Yi Kwang? Exactly, Kwan. Okay, the first name. And then the next slide. And what does A/P indicate? Great, yeah, anak perempuan, daughter of, okay? And the next question. So which term indicates if a Muslim person on the ID card is a female? Is it bin or binti? Yes, excellent, binti, okay? Now, informal titles. So on a day-to-day basis, when you interact with Malaysians, sometimes you might find that, especially, some of the expats, they feel really funny because the employees some employees might say, hey boss, or even if you go to a hawker stall, you'll find people when they're calling the person to come and take their orders, they'll say, boss, can you take my order, Sir or madam is generally used like in retail outlets. When a customer comes in, they will use sir, madam, miss, or they will say Mr. John. They won't say, like, let's say a person's name is John Brown, they might just say Mr. John, okay? Now, everybody is an uncle or an auntie in Malaysia, okay? So if a younger person is introduced from his dad. Let's say his dad says, meet my friend, Frank Brown, They won't say, nice meeting you, Mr. Brown. They'll say, oh, hello, Uncle John. And foreigners might think, I'm not your uncle, I'm not your auntie, but that's the way they say it. In fact, in India, they do it differently. So let's say it's Frank, they will say Frank uncle, instead of Uncle Frank. A lot of the slang, same in South Africa? Okay, all right. So bro or dude, the younger generation, they'll refer to each other, hey bro, hey dude. So it's very American as well. By the way, we have a lot of American sitcom. Are there any others that you might have experienced? Please leave your answers in the chat box. Okay, so this pretty much, I think, captures most of the informal titles, okay? And the next slide. Okay, so basically, now what? Now that we've run this workshop, now what? So as you start building your business in Malaysia, be very aware that hierarchy is everything, and it's very much group consensus decision making as well. For example, they're very comfortable working in teams versus individuals. So let's say in a meeting which you host and you ask people for their opinion openly, you might find that you could be faced with silence. Don't take that as ignorance, for example. Silence also can mean that they're showing you respect by internalizing the report. And one of the ways expats have said to me that they get that going is, and they could say, perhaps you can break out into little groups and let me know. Or you send a meeting agenda and say, please come prepared in your group to discuss this, so it's not so threatening for them. What's important is once you build that trust and that relationship, then they tend to be more open, okay? Pay attention to nonverbal communication. A lot of what is being said is unsaid. Okay, so it's got to do with the voice, the setting of the conversation, your facial expressions. The other thing, if you are upset for whatever reason with a particular Malaysian partner, etc., don't show your frustration and don't show your anger on your face, okay? The other thing also is ask open-ended questions. Don't turn around and say, Ali, what do you think? Throw it open to the group. They don't want to be put on the spot, okay? Because they feel that if they give a wrong answer, it's that malu, that loss of face. Most English people, most Malaysian, beg your pardon, most business people in Malaysia, we speak English fairly well, okay? But please don't assume that they all speak English fluently. Those who are educated abroad, you'll find that generally their English is far better than those who have studied in local universities, for example. And like I said again, the Australian accent You would need to be mindful, and also with the slang words that you use. I still remember when I first came to university in Adelaide, and I bumped into a girl in the dorms, and we chatted for a while, and she said, "See you later." And I said to her, "What time?" You know, so these kind of words, etc., are unfamiliar with Malaysians. So just be aware of this. Okay. So over to you, Catherine.
Look, thanks so much, Sharon, for those insights, and I hope the rest of the group have found those valuable. And I guess we also wanted to let you know that we've got the Asialink Business Country Starter Pack. So if you pop to the website, you'll be able to download the Malaysia Country Starter Pack, and it will have a summary of many of the things that we've spoken about this morning, but also additional information that will be useful for you as you start to think about, is this a market that I want to get into and start doing business? So we really wish you well on your journeys ahead. The first part of this morning has been, to give you some context, to help understand how that context shapes what's valued in Malaysia, and how the cultural priorities will show up, and particularly focusing on those priorities that are different or most different to the norms that we have here in Australia. And so with that scene set, as you move into the rest of the webinar session, you'll have the chance to really focus then on the export context, and then very specifically some of the technical requirements that you want to build in the good hands of Najib first, and later back with the Organics team. So it's just at the end of our time together. You've got a 4-minute break now. So I guess just before we send you on that 4-minute break, is there anything that Sharon or I didn't cover that you'd like to? Do feel free to pop any final last questions into the chat. We're happy to answer them here, or to come back with email responses for longer questions. So I'll just give a minute. Do use the chat if there's anything that we didn't answer or that we raised that raised more questions. All right. Lucy's asking, Sharon, is it true that partnerships with local partners must be in Malay?
Okay, that's a very good question. So when you form a business in Malaysia, you have to have a local partner. But if you're doing business with, in general, doing business, for example, it doesn't just have to be Malay, it's a diverse country. It can be Chinese, Indians. But if you are setting up a company, you will have to have a Malay partner.
Great question, Lucy. Thanks for asking.
Any other questions?
In that case, we wish you an amazing 3-minute break. Grab a glass of water, stretch, move, and Najib looks forward to welcoming you back in 3 minutes' time.
Can foreigners have a majority share of the company? Very good question. I don't know the latest regulations, and maybe I'll come back to you through Catherine. But by and large, Malaysians, as far as I understand, they will also have a large stake in the company. But I will confirm and let you know. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Do I register?
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And after such a really informative session that we just received there on the cultural awareness around Malaysia, so thank you to the Asialink team for bringing that all to our attention. So this session is going to be about the export market development side of the Malaysian market, focusing on food and beverage sector. But we do have a little bit of information around the health and beauty sector as well. Just a reminder from a housekeeping perspective that this webinar is being recorded, and that there's the Q&A function at the bottom. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. We'll either answer them on the spot, or we will take them on notice and respond after the session. Just depends on how large the question is. I will also mention that this is the second time that we've delivered a webinar out of 55 webinars remotely. Usually we've been delivering them all out of the office. Export Connect is based in Sydney. We're obviously in a lockdown and we're all working from home. So if there are some technical issues or glitches, please do be patient. We'll be sure to fix them, but hopefully we get to go on without any dramas. Normally, we would be in a room if this was prior to the pandemic, and we would have all engaged with each other, and we would have all, pressed the flesh, so to speak, exchanged business cards, so we'd all know who's in the room learning together at the same time. So what we've done here is just put together some of the logos of the businesses that have registered for this webinar, just to give you some context around who's joining in, who's learning along with you as industry peers. For those of you that don't know who Export Connect is, and I think looking at the registrant list, most of you do, we help food and agribusinesses enter and grow export markets by providing the marketing information, intelligence, competitor data sets, strategy development, and pre-qualified buyer leads to help businesses succeed. We also work with stakeholders to deliver workshops and forums. So we are 4 years and 1 month old, and over this time we've delivered over 220 projects for 135 clients covering 20 markets. One of the statistics we're most proud of is that a significant part of our work is repeat work, which is not just validating the need for a service like this, but also the quality of the service being delivered. And we've delivered over 100 workshops, most of which now have been online. So in terms of this session, we're going to be looking at market selection factors. So what are the key economic and demographic indicators when reviewing a market to see whether it is one that is suitable for our products? We're going to be looking at the consumer and channel trends. We'll also be looking at category and trade data. We'll have a look at what you need to review when undertaking an in-market competitor review. And then we will also be looking at just a sample of some of the competitors in market. We'll then share with you a market selection scorecard, which is what we always use when comparing markets for their suitability for our products and our brands. And we've been doing this at the end of each of the workshops, the AOL workshops. And so if you've been attending each one, which actually a few of you have attended, all the webinars delivered to date, you'd be able to keep your own scorecard if you've been keeping a note of some of the data that we've been sharing. So what market selection factors do we look for when going into an international market? Well, first of all, we need to look at the key economic and demographic indicators. So what's the size of the economy? Where's the what's the population makeup? What's the GDP per capita? Some of the information that's already been shared by the Asialink team. What are the consumer trends? Are they looking for convenience on the go? Is it health and wellness? What's the market size? Market growth prospects? And also, what's the category size? So you may be, you may look at Malaysia and think, okay, this is a good market because it's larger than Australia, but maybe the interest in your category in Malaysia is smaller than in Australia. So it's not just enough to look at the market size. You need to look at the category size, and you need to look at the category growth prospects. So it may be smaller in Malaysia, but maybe it's growing at 15% per annum year on year. And in Australia, it's growing at 2% per annum. So you may choose to participate in a growing segment within a growing market as opposed to a static segment in a bigger market. We need to look at the category trends, and we need to look at the channel trends. So is your product predominantly retail, predominantly food service? Is it e-commerce, a combination of all? What's going on in this area? We need to look at your competitors, and we need to look at your competitors both at a macro level, so looking at trade data to see where does most of product from your category go overseas, in addition to the markets that we're studying, where do they predominantly source their products from? And then at a micro level, how do you compare against the other brands on shelf or online? So we'll be going through that in a little bit more detail later on as well. We need to look at market access, which fortunately, Malaysia is not a difficult market for Australian products to get into. You know, certainly if you've got sort of meat derivative ingredients, then yes, it needs, you know, halal is definitely a big advantage, but otherwise it's a pretty easy market for Australian products to get into, from which there is a free trade agreement. And then you just need to look at certification. So if you are, for example, on this call and you have a product that you claim to be organic and it's not certified organic, you will find that that'll be a little bit of an issue, because buyers in Malaysia are now you know, very savvy when it comes to this, and you need to complete and if you claim for your product to be organic, you would need to complete paperwork to demonstrate that before you get listed and registered to be sold in the market. And if you can't demonstrate that, then you're going to have an issue. So let's look at the demographic indicators first. So we compare with Australia because it's just easier for many of the you know, many of the Australian exporters on this call to use Australia as a point of difference. So the Malaysian population is larger than Australia. Its urban population is a little bit less. So for us, when we're scoring markets that we find as markets of opportunity, the higher the urban population, the higher the score we would give them, because generally speaking, urban centers have shopping centers have supermarkets and restaurants, and supermarkets and restaurants need food, and in particular, urban areas tend to have higher, you know, population with higher GDP per capita. So our target segments tend to be in more urban centres as well. Population growth rate is similar to Australia, and Human Development Index is an important factor for us when we're reviewing markets of opportunity, because Human Development Index sort of covers education, health, and essentially the ability to understand the benefits of healthier, better for you type of products, which may need, you know, like a little bit of education that comes with it. So for Malaysia, it's sort of about a third of the way in, so not high, not low. But what we do know is for the more affluent consumer, their Human Development Index is higher. When we look at consumer, let's look at key economic indicators now. So even though Malaysia has a larger population than Australia, our GDP is significantly higher than Malaysia's. And what that does is it translates into a GDP per capita that's significantly higher than Malaysia as well. So what this means is when we look at the population of 32 million people, 32 million people are not our target. So if we discount the urban population, then puts us at 77% of the population. But then we need to discount those that just don't have the propensity to spend on high-end Western, you know, imported premium imported products. So what this is telling us is that of the 32 million people, in fact, our target market in Malaysia is much less than that, quite possibly, arguably, less than 1 million people. GDP growth rate in the first quarter is pretty good. Ease of doing business is fantastic. In fact, ranked higher than Australia. And logistics performance index is pretty good. It's in the top 25%. So not the best, but still pretty good. When we look at consumer characteristics between the two countries, the similarities are that we're both fairly urban populations, experience seeking in the food that we, in the products and services that we purchase, seeking healthier lifestyles, price sensitive to an extent, reliant on word of mouth, and a focus on quality. So these are similarities. Where there's you know, sort of the differences is Australians tend to be more career-minded, not as brand loyal, although we will see that brand loyalty was sort of challenged through COVID. And we tend to have just a more educated sort of professional kind of population as a whole, which was indicated by the Human Development Index. That doesn't mean that there aren't educated consumers in Malaysia. It just means that it's not the majority. You know, it's not all 32 million people of the population. How has COVID impacted Malaysia? Well, we heard from the Asialink team gave a thorough review on where that was at. And just to touch on some of the key points there, the economy has declined. Unemployment rate was the highest in 3 decades. The tourism industry, of which Malaysia heavily relies on, was devastated. What we're seeing is a shift towards online purchases. The Malaysian market and consumer was already the health benefits of which is health consciousness in general, not just in the food that they consume, but in exercise and everything else, was already on the rise before the pandemic. What the pandemic has done has accelerated the consciousness of being healthy. And what we know is from a vaccine side of things, Malaysia is actually doing quite well. And by November, December, about 80% of the population would have had their vaccines. When we look at consumer trends within Malaysia, we know that Malaysians are more cautious with their spending now. Online shopping has increased, so we know more than 50% of the population shops online, and more than 60% shop on smartphones. Brand loyalty is being tested because almost half of the consumers in Malaysia are willing to shift brands based on price. So this is coming back to the being cautious about their budget, and they're highly influenced by promotions as well. So if we're looking to export a product into Malaysia, and it's not enough to just put it on the shelf, there needs to be some sort of an activation program to ignite interest for people to jump and buy our product. There is a shift towards buying local. That'll mostly impact sort of everyday low price type products. The premium products, it doesn't impact it as much, although they will compare our premium products to other premium products. So there still needs to be a value for money proposition in there. When we look at the channel reviews in terms of the size and growth rates expected from these channels, and so this is data from Euromonitor, we see that grocery retailing dominates. And in particular, when we look at within grocery retail, we see that hypermarkets have the largest share, followed by supermarkets, and closely followed by convenience stores. Food service is in aggregate about the same as all 3 of those channels put together. E-commerce, and this is all e-commerce, is in at nearly $4 billion worth. And we see health and beauty is actually quite a significant segment within the Malaysian market. What's interesting here is to look at the growth rates. The annual average year on year for the past 5 years, we've seen hypermarkets suffer a lot, in particular because of the pandemic. And this is partly to do with, the social gathering restrictions. The hypermarkets are big stores and lots of people coming in. Also, hypermarkets are not in every neighborhood. So so then people have to travel to it, which then, you know, there's that whole movement ban restriction, so people are unable to go out to them. What we have also seen is convenience stores increase in popularity. Now that was already happening before the pandemic, but even more so during the pandemic, because of the proximity to where people are living, you know, having to have been locked down and staying at home. So convenience stores have seen a big spike. Of course, e-commerce is the big winner in terms of growth rates, and even the forecast annual growth rate for the next 5 years for e-commerce remains really quite high. It's you know, it's just a little bit less than what it has been year on year for the past 5 years, but still quite a strong result. We see also health and beauty growing fast year on year, and the forecast to be even greater as people start to go out more and you know, and buy more beauty products, you know, to dress up. Supermarkets, you can see, is also looking to get some decent growth at 3.2%, which is where you tend to find a lot more of the high-end sort of premium products going into the high-end stores. When we look at the Malaysia grocery retailing trends, so they're on the right. So for when we're looking at the channels, and also when we're looking at categories later on, you'll see on the right are the most popular brands and banners. So these are the most popular brands, banners within Malaysia that predominantly stock imported products, such as those products from Australia. Supermarkets and especially hypermarkets have taken a little bit of a hit. The consumers are favoring the smaller store formats, as I mentioned earlier. Premium grocery retailers are also doing well because it's synonymous with having fresh produce and better for you products, and this is where the consumers are moving towards. And e-tailers have also picked up. On the premium grocer side, we know that Village Grocer, Ben's Independent Grocer, Jaya Grocer are doing especially well. And we know that they're they source a lot of Australian products. So if you go through those stores, you'll find a lot of Australian products in every aisle in those stores, along with fresh produce. And they have growing organic sections within those stores as well. So organic products are doing, you will often find organic products in these outlets. But the biggest trend, I guess, in the grocery retail side is the growth of convenience stores. And in particular, and very interestingly, they're moving into the food service space as well with a lot of their on-the-go meals, take-home meals. And that brings us into food service. So, you know, consumers still favor Malay cuisine when we're looking at full-service restaurants and what kind of cuisine do they serve. You know, because of COVID, many of the restaurants, you know, struggling financially, have actually come together and cooperated and are trading out of shared kitchens. And what we're seeing is a smaller menu base as a result of that. So the menus are smaller, although they tend to be focused more on quality now. And the phenomenon of home delivery from restaurants is no different in Malaysia than what it is in Australia. And so we're seeing a lot of the home delivery platforms becoming very popular now. What we are also seeing is healthier menus are becoming more prominent as this move towards health consciousness is becoming more prominent. When we look at full service restaurant breakdowns, I mean, that you'll see there that there's a few Malaysian, few Pan-Asia brands. Of course, some of the American brands keep popping up, but still by far, Asian cuisine full service restaurants are the most popular within Malaysia, followed by pizza, North American, European, Latin American, and Middle Eastern. When we look at QSR, quick service restaurants, again, the big famous American brands appear, but then there are local ones there too. The dominant cuisine within the quick service restaurants is chicken, followed by burgers, Asian bakery, and then, you know, the convenience stores as I mentioned earlier, you're seeing the 7-Elevens and the Family Marts all coming up with their on-the-go meals to take back home or on the go. When we look at e-commerce trends, these are the sort of the dominant online platforms. They're on the right for grocery shopping. A few of those were covered in the e-commerce section within the Asialink presentation a little earlier. Online grocery retailing has more than doubled in Malaysia as a result of the pandemic. And we've seen increased sales of organic products online as well. Everleaf, which there was an image on the Asialink presentation, Everleaf puts together sort of eco solutions, and which part of that includes organic products, and they've recorded a boost of 300% in user traffic. Logistics companies, as a result of the pandemic, have also picked up their game, and so now we're seeing the ability to take frozen products and chilled product. So cold supply chain can all be delivered online now. Prior to the pandemic, they had that capability, but it was very patchy. Now it's a lot stronger, thanks to the volume of sales going through. And something we also know within Malaysia is that many of the sort of the smaller retailers and merchants have all moved to setting up e-commerce platforms to keep themselves relevant. That word pivot is not new to Malaysia either. So to get more insight about the Malaysian market, from the e-commerce channel within the Malaysian market, we recently interviewed one of the better distributors in Malaysia. And he's actually amongst other things, the Cheyenne Trading, and Jeremy is the owner of, the founder of that business. They're the distributors for Bellamy's Organic. So we'll just make sure we've got the volume happening through. Yep. Okay.
The two biggest e-commerce players in Malaysia is Shopee and Lazada, and we are on both platforms, and we definitely see that the sales have jumped a lot on e-commerce sites, but the sales only works for products that are established. So if you're a new product and the consumer has not tried your product, right, they will not buy it from e-commerce. So it's got to be something that they are very comfortable with. And it also helps that if you are on the, for example, Shopee's official Shopee Mall, that means you're an authorized distributor. These are the brand stores. So for example, Bellamy's is doing very well on the online platforms. Also because when consumer buy, they buy 3 cans or 6 cans at one go, and it's very heavy for them to carry from the retailers. So for them, they will buy online, sorry, instead from the supermarkets. So supermarkets will be for consumers who are just buying 1 or 2 cans, at their convenience, but not for those who are buying in bulk.
And in terms of e-commerce channels, how does the price differ to price on the supermarket shelves? Is there a difference in price?
Yes, because I think in most Asian countries now, the online shops, right, they are doing a lot of 11/11 sales, 12/12 sales, all these sales. So consumers tend to wait for these sales before they buy. So when they buy, they know that the prices will be heavily discounted. So they'll probably wait a month or 2 and buy. And when they buy, they'll buy in big quantities. We do see more and more products, more chilled and frozen products being on e-commerce platform, but I do not think that the sales is significant. No one's gonna buy ice cream in bulk, and products like that. If you're talking about via Facebook, yes, there are a lot of shops creeping up, and these are all homemade products like frozen snacks, frozen dumplings. These are all made and sold directly to friends. this category is also growing, so it affects those products being sold in the supermarkets as well.
We hope you found this video insightful. As always, feel free to reach out to the Export Connect team for your market development needs.
So that's why I need my team around me. They got to tell me what to do. I got to bring the microphone down. Got to make it all. It's all happening. So yeah. So that webinar that recording came from a webinar that we ran on the Malaysian market for food and fiber Gippsland about 2 months ago. So that's actually very current video. And we have another one to show you at the end when we ask the experts, including Jeremy from Cheyenne Trading, which are the categories of best opportunity for the Malaysian market. So let's have a look at the categories now. So starting with the dairy category. So there on the right is, you know, the sort of the brands that dominate within the dairy space. You know, I'm not going to go through every single point, but just, you know, the most important thing to note here is that there's been increased demand for functional dairy products. So probiotic, kefir, high protein, you know, gut health is the awareness for that in Malaysia is quite strong. And we've also seen a big increase in the demand for plant-based milks as well, partly because of the fact that they're ambient and so they've got longer shelf life, but also because of the health attributes as well. So when we look at trade data to determine where does the market mostly source its products from, and from where does most product go from Australia abroad, we look at the trade data, which is based on the harmonized commodity code system number. So it's usually, it can go up to 8 digits. Here we've gone at a high level looking at milk and cream. Specifically, the reason why we've got a few dairy categories covered in this webinar is because actually quite a significant number of the participants and attendees on this webinar are from a dairy background, and then we've also got a few which are in the ready-to-eat meals space. So we've got some data around that as well. So when we look at the Malaysian market, the key import markets for dairy, or milk and cream for this HS code, is Australia. And when we look at our key markets from an export perspective, Malaysia is the 3rd largest. Now, for those of you with a keen eye, you'd see that there's a big discrepancy between Malaysian statistics for imports, which has it at almost $40 million coming in from Australia, versus Australian exports coming in at 20 million for milk and cream. So that discrepancy can come down to a variety of factors. Sometimes it's just that the figures aggregated are not done over the same period. So some of the sales are not recorded. Sometimes it could be because of re-exports. So it could be that Australian product has come into Malaysia through Singapore. So Malaysia will record it as a Singapore export as opposed to an Australian export. It could be because of misallocation. Just not entering it right into the system. So there are a variety of reasons. The important thing here is to look at the trends. When we look at yogurt as a category, and here we go a little bit deeper in the HS codes, we go up to 6 digits. We see that Australia again is the dominant source, the largest source of yogurt products into the Malaysian market. When we look at where we export yogurt to, so based on this HS code, Malaysia is 2nd largest after Singapore. So a very important market if you are in the dairy space, and in particular in the yogurt space and milk and cream earlier. Let's look at cheese. Australia is number 1 in terms of where Malaysia sources its cheese products from. And when we look at where do we mostly export our cheese to, Malaysia is 3rd on the list, very high. From an ice cream perspective, we know that because of the pandemic, On-the-go purchases are down because people were buying more for home consumption. And so as a result, impulse ice creams dropped in terms of demand. But take-home ice cream tubs increased in demand. And we know with the improved e-commerce logistics, as mentioned earlier, the ice cream brands have been able to participate in the increased sales because of the e-commerce channel. Product can be taken home frozen. Interesting thing to note about ice cream is that product innovation plays a very important part, and in particular, having limited edition flavors keeps the interest in the brand. It increases its brand life cycle. When we look at ice cream, which has a code that only goes to 4 digits, we can see that Australia is the 5th largest source of ice cream products into the Malaysian market. And when we look at where we export ice cream to, Malaysia is also 5th on that list. So a pretty important market for Malaysia is a pretty important market for ice cream as well. Now, when we look at ready meals, so there on the right are quite a few brands. Now, you will notice that many of those brands are local. So some are imported from across Asia, but also many of them are local brands. Now, COVID increased the demand for product that has a long shelf life, whether that be frozen or ambient. So as a result, ready-to-eat meals being predominantly frozen, sales were boosted because of COVID. And with the uncertainty of the pandemic, it is probable that the demand for ready-to-eat meals will continue to be quite high. Now, from an export perspective, there was a bit of a sweet spot because of the movement control order in Malaysia, production was down a bit. Getting labor and ingredients in to make product to meet demand suffered. So exports from all these other different countries into Malaysia benefited from that to pick up the slack. Now, once the movement orders are sorted and once everyone's back in their factories, it is expected that and ready-to-eat meals remains in favor. It is expected that a lot of the local production will pick up that growth in demand. So in order to compete, exporters will have to continue to present value for money. Now, that doesn't mean that the imported product needs to be cheaper. It just needs to be able to articulate to the consumers the value for money, why it warrants for them to spend just a little bit more for an imported product because of the quality, because of the claims, because of whatever it is, because it's certified organic. Moving forward, it's important to keep innovating and marketing your products well. Now, ready-to-eat meals don't have a very simple HS code to cover, and because the group within the ready meals is quite diverse, we've used the pasta, whether it's cooked or not, and stuffed, as the guide just to get a feel. Remember, this is about, what we're sharing here in terms of these categories is how you study the economic data, the demographic data, the consumer trends, the retail trends, now the category trends and the trade data, to get to a point where you're building a picture overall to understand whether that market that you're studying, and in this particular Malaysia, is suitable or not. So, but interesting to note, nonetheless, when you look at this, I immediately assumed that Italy was going to be the largest source of product within this HS code, but actually it's not. So obviously this is looking like noodles maybe is coming up way on top, which is not surprising now when you see that noodles is part of this, because then we know that Asian cuisine is the dominant cuisine within Malaysia. Having said that, Australia has come in 6th in terms of Malaysian imports, and when we look at Australian exports, Malaysia comes in 10th. But there's a wild discrepancy between the export figure with the import figure. So again, it could be any one of those factors that I mentioned previously. The thing there to do is to look at the trends and just get a sort of a feel. So you may say, oh, well, that's great. Great to look at all this data and information, but where can I get it? Where can I get all this data? Well, there are many sources. Trade Organic, so AOL's trade website is building a library of information and videos that you're able to source to get some of this data. You've got Austrade, of course, has some information. Asialink have those great culture packs that was shared a little earlier. You could go to paid sources like Euromonitor. So we use Euromonitor data. A lot of Euromonitor data is available for free if you know where to look. Australian Food and Grocery Council have some great reports. MLA, if you're in the meat space. International Trade Centre is where we get the trade data from. Sometimes Export Council of Australia put up some reports on their site. It does take a long time to search all the different sites to look for the information that you want that's accurate and current, which is part of the reason why, you'll see there, we've got the Export Connect portal, which will go live, supposedly launching at Fine Food Australia in Sydney, but let's see if Fine Food goes ahead. But that'll be going live towards the end of August, early September, and what we're doing there is aggregating all these key indicators and data sets so that you can have it on your fingertips for a membership fee. So we've looked at the key data. We've looked at the economic data, demographic data. We've looked at consumer trends. We've looked at channel trends. We've looked at category data. So now the last sort of link in the chain is to understand who are you competing against in the market. So how do you go about assembling the in-market, competitor data sets? Well, first of all, you need to, of course, know which brands you're competing against. See images of the product. Understand its weight and price so that you can determine its per gram value, convert it into Aussie dollars, so in Malaysia it's ringgits, and then you need to have a look at country manufacture. So we probably wouldn't be competing against a Vietnamese manufactured product or even a Malaysian manufactured product, if we're pitching at the premium space. So we need to understand before we do a comparison, where's the product coming from? We need to understand their product claims. In particular, this is very important for this cohort because certified organic would be a claim that you'd be looking for versus a product that just says it's organic. You need to see what kind of packaging are they, is your competitor coming in? Is it coming in glass bottles? Is it coming in plastic? Is it coming in cardboard? What size? Is it mostly smaller sizes, mostly larger sizes? In Malaysia, you'll tend to find that it's got mostly smaller sizes. What position in store is it? So, if you're a condiment, are you in the condiment section? Are you in the deli section with the meats? And are you somewhere else at a gondola end? So you need to see where the competitors are positioned to see if you could be there as well. Is the product on promotion? You need to see this for two reasons. One, because it may impact the product price, and so you want to be comparing your price against another when it's at full price, not when it's at a discounted price. But you also want to see what kind of promotions they're running to give you ideas of what kind of promotions you should be running. In Malaysia, if the product is imported, it'll have the importer and distributor details on it. That's important because you may decide that you want to approach that same distributor or importer. Or if your product is too competitive, too closely sort of aligned with who the distributor is importing, the brand that the distributor is importing, then you may decide that you want to avoid that distributor. Either way, you should be looking at that. You should take a category photo. So this is for when you can travel. You should take a category photo. So not just see the individual brands, what they look like in individual products, but actually how is it aligned in the stores? How does it look in Jaya Grocer? How does it look in Village Grocer? How does it look at Ben's Independent Grocer? So that then when you go to pitch to a buyer later on, you can tell them, hey, this is where everything is aligned. This is where I see we fit. So you can actually demonstrate it through an image. If you're in the food service space, you have to try and identify which are the the food service outlets that your products could be an ingredient or a finished product for, and then have a look at their menus and see what brands they have at the moment, or do they advertise it's a certified Australian organic beef. So just to see if it's there. And then when you're traveling, also asking wait staff, often you can get some good insights from them. And then once you've got all these data sets, along with undertaking this competitor review online, so this is how you would go about it doing on shelf. It's almost no different doing it online. You still got to look at the images. It's just that there's no sort of category space. And then you have a look across the board, who your competitors are, what are their value propositions, so that you can determine yours. Ultimately, you want to be in a position where you're operating or you're targeting a market that has your category in a growth phase, so you can participate in the growth. And based on who your competitors are, you'd be able to articulate to the buyer that you belong in that space. Now, one of the things we're doing at the moment, because people aren't able to travel, is we're getting our representatives in all the markets overseas to actually film the category section. You're not always allowed to. It's not always easy to do it, but it's sort of trying to replicate, a market visit kind of feel. Never be the same without you traveling. If you travel and visit the store yourself, it's much more effective. But I think in these times, we just have to be creative in the way we can continue to be well informed to be able to succeed in international markets. So when we look at dairy products, we've just taken a mishmash of what's available in the market. Usually, when we do competitor reviews, and in particular dairy products, there's so many dairy products. You'd want to be looking at anywhere above 70, 80 brands within your category, or not brands, products within your category, just to get a really good feel for what your unique selling proposition is and how you compare. But here's sort of a bit of a mishmash of product from Australia and Malaysia. So no surprise, the Malaysian product is cheaper, with the exception of the Sunglow natural full cream Greek yogurt, which is actually more expensive than the milk. Now that makes sense because of the manufacturing process, but many would have probably assumed that Malaysian product across the board would be cheaper than Australian. When we look at more yogurts and some cheeses in here, you've got product from Europe, again some local product, but a lot of Australian brands, and you'll find a lot of Australian brands in supermarkets in Malaysia. From ice cream, again many Australian products, but then locally manufactured ice cream is quite strong, and in particular the locally manufactured ice creams, the on-the-go ice cream. So this is where some of the Australian ice creams are doing really well, because a lot of it is the take-home pack in the tubs. Ready-to-eat meals. So just got a mishmash there of wontons, spring rolls. So here you'll see the curry puffs. A lot of this product is either made in Malaysia or it's sourced from another Asian market. Again, some variations within the price, so they're not all closely aligned. So it's very important to do your competitor study to see how it all sits. So here's an example of a competitor review, the way that we would do it. So taking the images aside, so all the images sit separately because they're such big files. We then document where we've gone to look at a product. We document which retailer we went and visited. We look at the brand name. Of course, we've got the category. So this is for how we go about. So the product category, that's how we go about sorting all the data in aggregate. You need to look at the weight and what measurement it has. You put in the price on shelf, convert it into Australian dollars, and then for us, because we know what the margins are in Malaysia for a product that is imported, distributed, and retailed in these sort of Jaya Grocer, Mercato, cold storage, Ben's Independent Grocer, and the like, we can put that in. Then we convert. Then we divide it by the weight, so that we get a per gram price, so that we can then compare our client's product on a per gram basis to see how we fare. Are we cheaper? Are we more expensive? But that's not enough. We need to then see, well, what does it all mean? So where is the product manufactured is a very important criteria. We want to be comparing as much as possible against other imported products. We want to see what are the product claims. Again, certified organic is really important, but then there are other things like, protein enriched, like functional elements. Is it gluten? Is it free from? Does it have probiotics, prebiotics? Does it have kefir? All that type of stuff. What type of packaging? The position in store and promotion. So we document all of that. So using this document, along with all the category data that we have and trade data that we have, we start seeing, can we be competitive in this market? Do we have a position to play? And so we build a scorecard. So there you'll see we've got the GDP growth rate. We've got GDP per capita. So these are the when you look at the factors on the left there, a lot of this will look familiar because we went through all these points during this presentation on how to study a market. So GDP growth rate, GDP per capita, we look at consumer trends, and so there we give an objective view of are the trends that are going on in the market suitable and relevant to our product. We look at ease of doing business, logistics, because especially if we've got cold supply products, like products that need to be handled with a cold supply chain, we need to be confident that it can be handled appropriately. We look at the channel trends. So if we're mostly retail, what's going on in retail? If we're mostly a small pack that's good for convenience, then Malaysia would score it 5 out of 5 because we're bang on right where the trend is. We then look at the category sales. We look at the category growth rates. We then look at the import data for the macro competitive landscape, and then we look at the competitors that we're competing against on a micro level. And so you see here, out of a score of 135, we put most weighting on the competitive set. So it's a total of 50, 20 for import data, and 40 for the actual brands that we're considering. And so once you do the scoring, and so there on the right that's an example of a project that we did, where when we put all the scores in, after reviewing, so in this instance, 7 markets, the market that came out on top was the US, followed by the UAE. So one really big market followed by one really small market. New Zealand, then UAE. So it's interesting, when you look at this, often you would think, okay, well, if you put China and India in the mix, they're always going to come up trumps. Actually, they rarely come up trumps, especially when you look at the competitor data sets to understand what is the how relevant can our brand be for that market. So just got to, whoops. There we go. All sorts of support available. Export can be daunting. But for those of you that are new to export, you don't have to do it on your own. There is a lot of support available. So AOL, we're actually delivering a virtual market visit tour right now for AOL for 6 businesses looking to get into the UK market, and we're at the point where we're about to introduce them to buyers, prep them along the way. Export Council of Australia have some, good high-level sort of training, online training, which gives you sort of good conceptual ideas, depending on which state you're in. There are grants available, there are programs available. So Investment New South Wales at the moment's got its Going Global program. TIQ has its sort of showcase program. Global Victoria are working on a program right now. Food SA have their virtual market visit programs. Western Australian government have a pathway program, which is sort of training, mentoring, and then going to market. So everyone, there's support available in one way or another, depending on which state you're in. And and some of these Commonwealth organisations, also Austrade, obviously, can provide support. FIAL has Meet the Buyer events, and they've got the Australian online food catalogue, which they use for the Meet the Buyer events. So lots of support available. So if anyone's got any questions around that, feel free to ask us, and we can help point you in the right direction. And in fact, on our website, exportconnect.com.au, we have a grant section which we update about every 4 to 6 weeks. So you may find some national or state grants there that are available to you. Now we've got a video to go with Jeremy from Cheyenne Trading, and then also from we've got Benjamin Lim, who is the in-market representative for Global Victoria in Kuala Lumpur. So for those of you who have just gone through all of this and thinking, all right, well, what are the opportunities there? Let's hear it from the guys in the market.
Free from is not that popular in Malaysia, but for products like immune boosting, plant-based is definitely growing. We have, I know this guy who's bringing in Beyond Meat, and the response has been pretty good, even though its price is very high. So there is a movement towards plant-based, to replace animal-based meat, and vegan is also growing. Yeah, but I mean, these are at a very slow growth. It's nothing close to what you have in Australia. Organic sector, the growth is mainly in children or babies, because usually the parents would want to start the children with organic milk or organic formula. But they know that once the children reaches 3 to 5, they are no longer able to control everything that is being eaten being 100% organic. So the organic do drop off from that age onwards.
I think Jeremy touched on those major points there in terms of fresh, organic, but also quality assured. Of course, when we're talking about Malaysia, we do also need to be cognizant of halal certification and whether we believe something needs to be halal certified or not, or what that means in terms of the marketing and the take up. But I think the move and the continued investments that Australia and Victoria are making in ensuring the provenance of our food is going to pay dividends. So we are looking for, and we want that uptake in Victoria, so we can continue to use that as part of our branding in market, whether it's organic or whether it's just certified Victorian Australian. And I'm sure many of you on the line would be aware of the significant initiatives that Agriculture Victoria is putting in place around this and their new export program on that. I'm going to hand to Ben to talk a bit more about what he's seeing in terms of actual lines.
Yes, thanks, Rebecca. So what you say is very true, because Malaysia is a Muslim majority country. So halal certified product is a must if you are looking at retail, food service, or QSR. And secondly, and also the provenance of Victorian Australian products, it's very highly held in Malaysia because of the quality. And to Jeremy part, yes, organic and meat replacement food, it's growing, but it's not as fast as Australia, and it's growing on a very, very small level. I was in fact talking to a importer yesterday or Monday about meat replacement. They say yes, they are a market here, but a lot of these people, when they're looking for vegan or vegetarian, they are more the traditionalists, not not making some pseudo meat as per se, but they go for fresh vegetables, fresh tofu or tofu based or soy based product to replace meat. That's one point. And also, what is going very, very fast now, it's fresh produce like broccoli, tomato, celery, within Malaysia, because of the recent problem in China, the food security problem. So if you go to any supermarkets here, you could see other produce and Australian produce, the price would be quite high. But again, you can see, empty shelves or empty bins. So yeah, that's my take on it.
We hope you found this video insightful. As always, feel free to...
I've got to stop this man from talking. So that was, interesting to see feedback from the market. So this is an in-market rep that has been there forever, and from the owner of Cheyenne Trading, which is a highly reputable distributor of predominantly better for you type foods and certified organic foods. And so while they suggest that there is growth for certified organic brands within the food and agri space, it's coming off a low base. So I guess we need to have the expectation for those of you that are looking to promote your product on the basis that it is certified organic, that the opportunities are there, but the volume may not be so large yet. It's coming off a smaller base. So just before we move on to the next stage, and also opening to Q&A. So the next step will be Josephine coming on from Australian Organic Ltd to talk about organic certification for the Malaysian market in particular. If you could just ask these and respond to these two very simple questions. These are really important for us to understand the content that's just been shared. So we're just talking about the Export Connect content, not including the Asialink content, on what your overall experience has been on the session, and would you recommend this session to peers who are wanting, in this particular instance, to learn about the Malaysian market. So I'll just give you, it's just two questions, but just to give you enough time to respond to these. All right, good. All right, there's just a couple more to come through. All right, excellent. That's most of them. Thank you. So on this point, oops, I'd like to bring in Josephine from Australian Organic Ltd.
Thank you, Najib. So I will take you through the regulatory requirements for accessing the certified requirements of the organic market in Malaysia. So as soon as Najib stops sharing his screen, I can share my screen. Perfect. Okay, can you all see? Is that right? Let's try again. There we go. Okay. So I come from a farm management background and have great respect for all producers. I've worked on a number of organic farms around the world and they all vary. So I understand how certification requirements can be wordy and will do my best to simplify the regulations for you. So there's two main steps into getting your organic product from Australia into Malaysia. And the first one is getting it out of the country. So the Export Control Act came out in 2020. It's the most recent version. Similar to other versions, it's been streamlined into a nice 700-page document for your happy reading. And it sets out the overarching legal framework for the regulation of exported goods. So this is managed by the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. And for those new to this webinar series, the export market of Australian organic goods is regulated. So if you want to export it with an organic label, it is considered a prescribed goods. And this also means it's illegal to export prescribed goods without approval from the Australian government. So within this, you've got the organic order rules per se, and they set out the operational requirements that must be met to support, to export these specific goods from Australia. And the main way that they do this is through an organic goods certificate. So this used to be known as an organic produce certificate, and this needs to be certified by a government-approved certifying body. There are 6 in Australia at the moment, and you can see this on the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment website. So the Organic Goods Certificate ensures that, you know, these Australian goods have been subject to a regulatory system that guarantees the organic and biodynamic claims. And it specifically references the national standard for organic and biodynamic produce. So hopefully you are familiar with this document. It gives details on all the organic principles and protocols for growing and processing organic products here in Australia. So being certified to the ACOS, or the Australian Certified Organic Standard, isn't sufficient if you are exporting to Malaysia. You need to be certified to the national standard. So with this, it excludes cosmetics and pet cosmetics. So technically these don't need to have an OGC certificate to leave the country, but look into this further with your certifying body, because otherwise, you know, all other food and fibre is regulated by this organic goods certificate. So we've gotten it out of Australia, how to get it into Malaysia. So even though we have a free trade agreement with Malaysia, you still require your organic goods certificate for all organic exports from, you know, 10 kilograms, 10 litres, regardless of the importing country requirements. So we have no organic equivalency with Malaysia. They have like a reasonably new organic program, which has had 2 sort of establishment methods, both through sort of NGOs and the private sector. And it was only recently that it was implemented by the government that you had the Malaysian Organic Scheme. Now I'll tell you more about that. Otherwise, you can see that they've had a number of labels over the recent years. It is up to your company if they want to have this logo on their product, because the regulations are implemented but not enforced. Having said that, as Najib mentioned, you do need to have the importer details on your product as well, and I'll go into that more. So the other relevant documents, like I said, you've got the Malaysian standard. It was most recently updated in 2015. Of note, it is only plant-based, so it doesn't have anything to do with livestock regulations. And because of this, comparatively to like the national standard, it's quite a short document. It's loosely based on IFOAM principles, which is the International Federation for Organic Agriculture Movements. So for people who are exporting livestock products, you really need to look at the Regulation 18, which will tell you more about the labelling requirements of livestock products that are going into Malaysia. So all organic products in Malaysia also need a certificate accompanying the product to, you know, prove that it's organic. And in this case, you can also use the organic goods certificate for this purchase, or purpose rather. So specifically with meat, Asialink mentioned, you know, that the product has to be halal because Malaysia has a majority Muslim population. And as an organic producer, there are specific abattoirs that offer halal procedures that you would need to use for this. But there's a few different steps that you have to do before you can get this product into the country. So from January 2021, they introduced new regulations that the inner and outer packaging of the product had to be labelled with a registered logo of an Islamic organisation in Australia. And the name, address, you know, all these details of the abattoir and when the product was slaughtered. And this extends to beef, mutton and venison. Okay, so yeah, I've got pretty quick, but Malaysia is a relatively easy country to import into. So as long as you have your organic goods certificate and you're more all right from this end of the country, and you You also make sure that your goods are halal and approved by an Islamic organization in Australia. You just need to follow what Najib has said, you know, contact your customers and distributors in Malaysia, make sure that there's a market for your product. And because the Malaysian standard is quite short, you also need to make sure that the labouring requirements for your product are met, because that is the trickier part of importing organic into Australia, or from Australia into Malaysia rather. But yeah, if you have any questions regarding these regulations, please let us know.
Yeah, or any questions on the market development side, any questions at all? You know, any questions about the lockdown in Sydney? Any politics questions? You know, I do have to say, Malaysians are very polite people. So you would have seen in the Asialink example, Sharon shared the naming sort of culture, and she mentioned the former Prime Minister of Malaysia. His name is Najib. Now, when I was exporting to Malaysia many years ago, when he was popular, every time I would call or talk to someone like, oh, you know, our Prime Minister is Najib. Then he got embroiled in a scandal, stealing $2 billion from the Malaysian, from Malaysia. And people stopped saying, oh, you know, our Prime Minister is Najib. They didn't want to associate me with him. So that was one bit of a cultural story to share in addition to Asialink's story.
True. Well, if there aren't any questions, I might get out of the share screen then and hand back over to finish the webinar.
All right. So no questions? You can always email us with any questions that you have. The next AOL Export Masterclass is on the Indonesian market. So that's going to be delivered on the 10th of August. The link for that is already on the Trade Organic website. So you can jump in on the website and connect there. I think I already saw some registrations for the Indonesian event already. So just keep a note of that. 10th of August. Indonesia is quite a complex market. It's fast growing for premium products, but there are a lot of pointers that you need to be very aware of when considering the Indonesian market. But apart from that, I think we're done. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Take care.